And we're live. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Power Hour podcast. I'm here with Erfan, who's a recruiter within the Power Platform space. And I've been so eager to have this conversation with you, Erfan, because you have such a unique story into coming into the Power Platform space, starting as a functional consultant, and then transitioning into recruitment, which is what you do now, running your own business. So many questions to get into, so many things I've prepared, but obviously we'll keep it natural and free flowing. Anyone at home, if you want to check out Erfan, you can see him on LinkedIn. Everything will be in the description. But Erfan, if you give a quick introduction to yourself, let the people know who you are.
Awesome, Roger. First of all, mate, thank you so much for getting me on this podcast.
My pleasure.
It's my first one, so you've definitely got me out of my comfort zone, and I think getting out of your comfort zone is where you really do get to grow. So, thank you for the opportunity, first of all. So for the listeners, I've been in the Microsoft Biz app space coming up to just over half a decade now. So, as Howdang said, started off my career as a Dynamics CE Power Platform functional consultant, worked with a tier one partner across primarily public sector clients, touched on the stack into different areas. And through that journey as a consultant, of course, you do change jobs and naturally you interact with recruiters. Some of these interactions can be positive, some of these interactions can be horrible, to be honest. And
Mm.
I think about just over 4 years into my just about 4 years into my career, I was looking to make a change and was looking for a job, and I didn't have a great recruitment experience, so I decided, what could I do to make a bit of a change, and I decided to make the shift into recruitment. I thought there was a niche in the market for someone to do recruitment who actually understands the tech space to sort of
Mm.
bridge that gap. So I decided to make that move just over 2 years ago. And then I worked within a large Dynamics platform specialist agency, helping them fill in roles for many tier one partners, some end users as well. And then about 6 months ago, made another transition and set up my own agency again, focusing on Microsoft Biz apps. So that's a bit of a high level overview about my professional career.
Yeah, amazing. And I feel like it's a cool story because you have almost a unique point in the sense of you work technically in the space and then you decided to move into recruitment. So you've kind of gone over how that was, and some of your justifications and reasons for it. And I feel like what's also super interesting is you started your business as well. Like, how many years were you in recruitment before you started your business?
You know what? I was coming up to 2 years in
Two
recruitment. So
years.
I didn't even fully complete 2 years, which I get what a lot of listeners might be thinking, is that enough experience to set up your own
Mm,
business?
mm,
Doesn't sound a lot. And I would agree, if I had just gone into recruitment with no prior experience, I think that would be a huge challenge.
mm,
I think what definitely helped me was having the knowledge in the Power Platform space and
mm,
dynamics, having the network, and then essentially just excelling in my recruitment role. For me, it's
mm,
always about if I do something, I need to do it in the best possible capacity.
mm,
That also meant when I was working as a consultant, always stretching myself, always learning. So if you're one of those folks, you don't allow a number of years to hold you back. Of course,
mm.
with 10 years in the industry, I would have a much larger network, a much bigger safety net, and it would be a much easier of a jump. But I thought now was the right time. I'd learned enough. I had a great network. I've been working since I was 20, so had a little bit of money saved up so I could take the risk.
Mm.
And so far, the move's been amazing, and the support I've had from the community has honestly been unreal.
Yeah, honestly, one of the best communities I've had the pleasure of interacting with, which is why I started speaking to people in the community. And you made quite a name of for yourself in the sense of, 2 years in the recruitment space, and then starting your business. I think it's an incredible jump in the sense of you took that risk, and I feel like it's paid off for you. I see the testimonials of people coming back to you and saying the incredible work you've done. And I feel like, as you mentioned, that all stems from the functional consultancy and the development work that you had prior to that. So I guess my question is, how has that shaped your thinking? You've touched on it a little bit. If we get into it a
Mm.
little bit deeper, how has your technical experience shaped the way that you approach recruiting within the space?
That's actually a very, very good question. I think what I like to do is approach recruitment like a consultant. So, as a consultant, we're trained to go in and ultimately get the best result for our clients. Now,
Mm,
what does that mean? Listening, right? I mean, we have two ears and one mouth. So, most important thing is listening and
Yeah.
understanding what your clients want, and then having the technical knowledge of your domain to offer them the best possible solutions. Taking that to recruitment, what does that mean? Speaking to candidates, understanding what do candidates really want. Also, understanding what do your clients want, and then matching the two. It doesn't sound like rocket science, but there are so many folks out there who don't bother to listen on
Mm,
both ends, not listen to what your client really needs and categorizing those requirements into Moscow, basically. As a consultant, you get told to use Moscow requirements for your functional and non-functional requirements. You have the same thing in recruitment with their needs for a particular person. So some of their functional requirements could be is some of their technical skills. Some of the non-functional requirements could be is their personality, their attitude, their soft skills. And
mm,
I like to understand all of those for my clients. And then when I do speak to my candidates, I will pre-screen them against those requirements and then make sure they're the right fit for the role. Because ultimately, I need to make sure that both parties' time isn't being wasted here. So the last thing I ever want to do is, you know, take a square and try to squeeze them into a triangle because
mm,
that doesn't help anyone. And I know recruiters have a reputation for doing that very often. I mean, I've been through that situation where I was sent forward to a role. The recruiter didn't understand the requirements of the role. And then, their internal recruiter in that particular part had to go at me for not having the skills that he was looking
mm.
for that particular position. And that sort of meant that I had a really bad experience. And, for me, going into recruitment, I wanted to make sure candidates I do with don't have the same experiences.
Yeah.
So
Yep.
going back to your question is, yeah, taking those consultancy experience about putting your clients first, understanding their requirements, being consultative, and then taking that to recruitment and applying that to your clients, both the candidate as well. So yeah, I think that gives you a bit of an idea of what I like to do and how I've taken my consultancy skills and then apply those to recruitment.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm always curious about the recruitment space because I've always tried to understand it a little bit deeper because I feel like having recruiters that you can trust and keep around is important.
Mm.
I had Sarah Jones in here, a good friend of mine. I know a good friend of yours as well,
Yeah.
who's also a recruiter. And she was speaking about having some recruiters around you that you can trust.
Hmm.
How do you know if you can trust a recruiter or not? Like, what are some of the telltale signs up? Because I know you know the industry, you can
Yeah.
separate the good from the bad. How do we know that we're getting a good experience or we're being sold dreams?
I would say the first time you communicate with the recruiter, I think it's really critical that they actually give their time to understand your story. So, what's going on in your current situation? What are your previous experiences? How have they shaped your current skill sets? And ultimately, what is it that you're looking forward in the future? And in that conversation in general, they're trying to get to know you, right? Who are you? What do you do outside of work? What makes you tick? What's your situation, right? For example, and that conversation, if you do it properly, it takes absolute minimum 30 minutes. It doesn't
Mm,
take anything less than that. Sometimes it can even stretch an hour. So if you can think about it, that's actually quite a long period of having a one-to-one conversation where you can really get to know someone. And a great recruiter does that because they need to understand where you're coming from, what are your skill
mm,
sets, and ultimately doing right by you. So if they're trying to constantly understand what's important to you and sort of juggling those, let's say, three of the different must-have important things for you, and sort of really trying to understand how do you think, then you know that they're trying to do right by their customer, and they're
mm,
ultimately also trying to do right by you. I think that's how you know. There's other telltale signs as well in terms of, do they have, for example, credibility? Do they have testimonials? I mean, that's a good way. I mean, if they've worked with a colleague of yours and they've helped them to be put into a position and they're happy in their role, you probably know that they probably know what they're doing and they're someone you can trust. Someone that's involved in the community, for example, that you know of, that many other people can vouch for, like Sarah, that you mentioned. If you're out there, you're getting involved in the community, you're bothering to learn. I can't hide myself. I'm out there in the community, so I can't screw anyone up. I've got my trust and my reputation matters a lot.
mm.
So I think that's one of the telltale signs. A couple of those that you could reference to ensure to find out is this recruiter good or not. Of course, there's loads of large agencies out there as well. I say primarily for Dynamics and Power Platform, like Sarah probably would have said to you in the past.
Mm.
It's really important to work with a specialist because they understand your space and they understand the nuances.
Mm,
Working with a general tech recruiter, they probably don't understand the differences between Dynamics CE and F&O and BC and Power Platform, and even within those, the different nuances. So it's really critical you work with a recruiter who's a specialist, and then you can then make sure that they're not pigeonholing you into just the role that came by them. They're actually ensuring that they get you in a role that aligns with what you're looking for and your career aspirations. Like
mm.
they're not just calling you, having a 10-minute conversation, and then sort of putting you forward for a role.
Yeah, no,
Um,
absolutely. And something that I've had beef with, and it really bothers me, is when recruiters call me and 7 minutes into the conversation, they're asking me what my salary is and what my expectation is. Like, you never did that. Like, I can't remember a time where you've asked me what my salary is.
mhm,
Definitely not in our first conversation. Uh,
mhm,
and I did notice that, when we had our first conversation, you stayed, you spoke to me, you got to know me, you got to know my background, we had a joke, we
mhm,
we had a good conversation, and I feel like
mhm.
it's because you genuinely listened. So I think that is some good advice for recruiters and some good advice for people listening to recruiters, to know if they should trust them or not. Irfan, you mentioned specialization, and I had a question for you.
Mhm.
Do you ever consider moving away from Power Platform slash Dynamics? Like, you have built such a good niche, in my opinion. Like, I think it's such a,
Mhm.
in my opinion, in comparison to the other technology, the pieces of technology out there, I feel like it's a real niche in the sense of there is a lot of people in it, but
Mhm.
it's preserved, and I feel like the community
Mhm.
is really cool, and they're very welcoming in that sense. Have you ever thought about pivoting? Like, I know there's like Salesforce
Yeah.
recruiters, and we've got all these kind of cloud platforms, and AWS, and even Google at this point. How do you feel about transitioning careers? I know you've just started your business within the Power Platform space, but
Mhm.
is that ever an option? And why would that be an option for recruiters, if it would be at all?
I mean, to be honest, I mean, you'd be crazy to pivot away from an area if you're a specialist in that domain. Like you
Mm,
mentioned, you have a track record of candidates that you've placed, of course, over a couple of years. Let's say you've got a 10-year track record. There's going to be candidates that you're placing, every maybe 3 to 4 years that come back to you. Naturally, you would have such a strong network of folks. Some of these folks won't even be on LinkedIn, right? You
mm,
just have their personal phone numbers, and when a hiring manager needs them, you're the only person that knows of them. So you'd kind of be crazy to leave that space, and you'd
mm,
be sort of walking away with all that network as well. So me personally, I would never walk away from the Microsoft domain,
mm,
specifically the biz app space. Now, would I, let's say, divert and sort of dip into maybe an M365 role, or dip into an Azure role, or a data
mm,
role that's related to a Dynamics role? Yes, I would. Any good recruiter should be able to recruit into a tech domain they're not a specialist in, but
mm,
the power of being a specialist is your network, your connections, the people who trust you. So when I have a role and I take it to someone, there's a level of trust already there. They know if I'm going to be
mm,
giving them a role, discussing a role, it's probably because I feel like it's a great fit for them and their career. So they're going to be open to hearing about
mm,
that role
mm.
versus, a general tech recruiter just hammering their inbox with loads of emails. Um, that's not really going to go anywhere, to be fair.
Yeah, absolutely. No, it's a great answer. And you mentioned LinkedIn there.
Yeah.
Now, I quarrel with this because I think everyone should have a LinkedIn. I think you are crazy if you don't have LinkedIn. Dare
Yeah.
I say it? But don't get me wrong, I hated social media for years. I didn't have anything. I don't know Instagram, LinkedIn, Facebook, etc. Deleted it all. And was very quiet during lockdown. Didn't do much at all on there. What a uh, Let me ask you bluntly: should we
Yeah.
have LinkedIn?
100%. If you're a tech
Yeah.
professional, you'd be crazy not to. I mean, if you just think about the amount of information in terms of I could benefit your career in terms of all these blogs, all these
Mm,
podcasts. Look at all the MVPs who are sharing their knowledge for free on
mm,
LinkedIn. Some of this information is literally just on LinkedIn. It's not on YouTube, for instance.
yeah.
Like some of these blog articles, you would never discover these bits of information. I mean, you've got Powerways, who's a CI/CD pipeline specialist. He's a wizard in that. You've got Scott Duro, for example. You've got Charlie Phibbs. You've got so many amazing folks from the community who are specialists in these different areas. Paul, for example, Paul Marino on Power Automate. You wouldn't get access to their specialty. Frank, for example, from the pages side of things, you wouldn't get access to all those nuggets of information if you went on LinkedIn. So you'd be missing out big time.
Mm,
I think you'd be crazy not to have it. And employers do look on people's LinkedIn.
mm,
And it's important because, let's say you're someone who wants to stand out a little bit. Having a LinkedIn does help. They can see your certifications on there. You might have listed out on your CV. They can see that you're engaging with the community, you're engaging with different blog posts. You might be having conversations on a particular topic. So, and they can see when those comments were done. If you're having conversations on Power Automate at 8 p.m.
mm,
on a weekday or on a weekend on
mm.
LinkedIn, then they can see there's a level of interest in the space that they wouldn't get from just a CV. So I think it's critical to have it. You'd be crazy not to have it.
Yeah, and as a recruiter, where do you stand on it when you're looking for candidates and you're looking for potential matches? Like,
Mhm.
do you use it to reach out to people, to cold call people, like, and also kind of pairing on that question, what are
Mm.
some of the good signs you see from a LinkedIn profile, and what are some of the bad signs you see from a LinkedIn profile? Like, what separates the good
Okay,
from the bad?
fantastic. So I'll answer the first bit of that question. So what do recruiters use LinkedIn for? So
Mm,
essentially, LinkedIn is a candidate database, right?
mm,
Ultimately, right, that Microsoft owns. And we have to subscribe to, we have to pay a hefty fee to get
mm,
access to all that data. And based on that data, we can filter for particular roles using certain things that we look for. So, using LinkedIn, we'd discover new candidates, first of all, connect with those candidates. Of course, email candidates. I'm sure everyone's been emailed and annoyed by tons of emails they've
mm,
had from recruiters. They're probably getting like 10, 20, maybe a month from various
mm,
recruiters. Also, LinkedIn can be used to find candidates' CVs. So if they do upload it on LinkedIn, you can get access to their CVs. Sometimes phone numbers and emails as well, which can be great because some folks do have LinkedIn, but they're not active on it. That's another way of reaching out to them. So it's used for candidate outreach. It's also used for client outreach, so finding your clients, which employees are hiring Dynamics and Power Platform talent. Those
mm,
are the organizations you should be probably speaking to. So it could be used from a multifaceted approach. You can also get really insightful bits of data from LinkedIn that you can share with your clients to show them, how much is the Power Platform space growing?
mm,
What are their competitors doing in terms of hiring? Are they retaining talent? Are they sort of growing their team? Or are they losing talent? So there's a multifaceted way of using LinkedIn as a recruiter, both to serve the needs of the candidates and the clients. I'd say it's quintessential, to be honest, for tech
mm.
recruitment to have LinkedIn and have access to all this data and then use it in the right manner.
Yeah.
Now, again, going to your second part of the question is, I've got LinkedIn. I use LinkedIn Recruiter, which is what recruiters use. What is a great profile, for example? I think what a great profile again demonstrates their skill set. So first of all, the title makes sense. If you're a Dynamics Power Platform developer, call yourself a Dynamics and Power Platform developer. Don't just call yourself a IT developer, for example. I know that might sound
Mm,
trivial, but I do see that sometimes. You need to make it really clear what is your role. Again, if you're a senior Dynamics Power Platform developer, probably put senior there. Put lead. I get it. It's subjective what lead is and a senior, and that could be a whole different discussion. We keep having how do you classify a senior and a lead,
yeah.
but
Yeah.
essentially identifying, what is it they actually do. Now, don't get me wrong. You could be called, for example, a developer, but for the last 2 years, you've been acting as an architect on your project
Mm,
and you want to be discovered by recruiters for architecture positions, well, you need to have reference of architect all over your profile. So your
yeah.
your title, for example, the description of your role. So these key things are quite element. Again, keeping your LinkedIn up to date. Which organizations are you working in? Which sectors, for example, the type of projects, the type of technologies that you're using. Uploading LinkedIn with your up to date certifications and just actively using it because all of those different things that you fill out your information with. LinkedIn um, takes in and then allows recruiters to filter by that essentially and to discover some of these candidates. So let's say you've got a particular niche, like let's say field service, and within field service you've done resource scheduling optimization, for example. It's a particular area of field service. Now,
Right.
if you don't have that written anywhere on your CV, and I've got a contract role for a field service contractor, and they need to have resource scheduling optimization, and you need a contracting role, for example,
Mm,
you don't have that on your LinkedIn profile. Unless if I don't know you, I might not even reach out to you about the opportunity because it's not on your LinkedIn. So if you want to
mm.
make sure you're getting opportunities to do with the tech domains that you're a specialist in, have that all over your LinkedIn. So, I mean,
Yeah.
if you look at Francisco's LinkedIn, who's a Power Pages SME,
Hmm.
sure you'll see Power Pages all over it, for example, right? You'll see loads of blog posts. So that means he can be discoverable by recruiters and also potential um, other organizations who need his services as a specialist. So even if you're trying to do your own little side hustle, you've got your own sort of thing that you've got going on. You need to get your expertise out there, or else you won't be discoverable and you'll miss out on all these opportunities.
Yeah, absolutely. So, so important. And like, it baffles me to this day that people don't have it. Everyone has their reasons, and I had
Mm,
my reasons previously. Like, I used to go on LinkedIn, and it used to make me feel really bad because I would compare myself, be like, oh, this guy's doing better than me, this person's doing
mm,
better than me. it's it's a difficult platform because
mm,
it's like the platform of your wins, and you don't
mm.
post your losses on there. Like, you might post your losses on Instagram or Facebook,
Yeah,
but LinkedIn is just strictly your wins, and it can be a bit
yeah,
difficult, but I feel like once you get over that, it is so, so
yeah.
important.
And again, so
Yeah.
just to touch on that, I think again, like some folks I do hear, they get annoyed with LinkedIn. They're like, oh, people just use it just to, show off their life or talk about
Right.
politics or religion, something that most folks don't like discussing in. And I get, LinkedIn is a professional place for, your professional career and talking about that. But sometimes it's good to get your personality out as well
Oh,
sometimes.
yeah.
But again, it's up to you what you want to engage in and what you don't want to engage in, right? You like
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
if you don't want to engage in, political discussions or, more about getting your own personality, you don't have to. You can just
Mm.
strictly use it for professional purposes. And again, you'd be crazy not to have it because you don't know what you're missing out on. You don't need to be on
Yeah.
there every day. You don't even need to be on there once a week, even once a month or one day is more than enough. I know maybe yourself and maybe me, we're on it every couple of days. LinkedIn is kind of a big part of our lives,
Mm.
but it doesn't mean it needs to be a big part of everyone's life. If that sort of makes
Agreed.
sense.
Agreed. No, no, absolutely. Use it as a tool. Don't use it as a crutch. I think
Yeah,
social media in general can absolutely be, um, it's addictive. Like, you got it on your
yeah,
phone, you're looking at it every day, all of it. Like, we can fight it as much as we want. I'm watching TikToks and YouTube Shorts as much as the next guy. I don't want to be, but hey, they
yeah.
suck you in, and you need to try and put some guide rails on that. Um, I I have a question specifically around it's around LinkedIn, and just kind of another note on that. I think everyone should tell their stories. I think that is
Hmm.
so powerful. Like, I have a weird analogy that I was thinking about the other day, and it was I really like MMA. I really like watching UFC, but I only like watching the fighters I know. I don't like watching
Yeah.
the fighters I don't know. And I question myself on it. I was like, why is that? Like, I
Mm,
like the sport, but I don't like to
mm,
watch the fighters I don't know. And the answer for that is because I don't fall in love with the sport. I fall in love with the stories that they tell. And I feel like it's the same case. But I'm not sure if you grew up watching WWE, but we didn't fall in love with the wrestling so much. We fell in love with
yeah,
the stories that they were telling. So I think it's so important for people to get out there, tell their stories, don't be shy.
exactly.
People either don't care,
Yeah.
or they do care and they
I
like
mean,
it.
exactly. I mean, I've got to ask, you mentioned MMA because I'm quite into that as well. So
Yeah.
who's your favorite fighter over the last couple of years, whether they're still fighting or whether they've retired?
Oh man, it has to be Pereira, doesn't it? I know he lost the other day, but
Okay.
he's been absolutely crazy.
Nice.
He's been dominating the scene. So yeah, Alex
Oh,
Pereira for me, top
awesome.
top. Yeah, I
For
think
me,
he.
for
Yeah.
me, it's got to be Khabib because you mentioned the story, the story of him fighting a bear
Mm,
when he was a little kid,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
and the sort of unbeaten record,
Mm,
especially his fight against McGregor. For
mm.
me, number
That was
one.
huge. That was
Yeah,
huge. And I feel like, we're getting into MMA talk now, but I
yeah,
feel like when it comes to the story that they built up, McGregor
yeah.
disrespecting his religion and disrespecting his wife and coming at him,
Mm,
and him beating him the way he did, that's what we
mm,
fell in love with. And before
exactly.
that, Habib, he never lost a fight, but people didn't
Yeah,
know his name. Why? Because he didn't have the story. He
yeah.
wasn't telling his story to back it. But once he fought McGregor, he had a platform to do that. To bring it back to Power Platform, I feel like you can apply that to anything. If you tell
Yeah.
your story, people will be more engaged. And I did that recently, and I don't look back from it. Like, and your story isn't going to be perfect. You're going to have
Mm,
problems. You're going to have situations. You're going to have adversity, and that's what makes the best stories, when you overcome that, and you can
exactly.
be the wiser for it. So,
Exactly. I
100%.
mean, bang on, and I think that brings me on to a sort of good point is look, no one is perfect at the end of the day.
Mm.
By no means am I saying I'm the perfect recruiter. Or there is a perfect recruiter out there. We all make mistakes, but ultimately you can tell who's actually, a good recruiter versus someone who's a bit of a cowboy, to be honest, right?
Yeah.
And you can see that by, some of their actions, their lack of testimonials and what you hear from your friends. So that's me not saying that, I've never made a mistake. I've not hassled anyone about roles,
Mm.
etc. I may have in the past. I do make mistakes. I'm not perfect, but I think what's important is a good recruiter always wants to keep improving
Mm.
constantly. And that's not just about bringing in more money, because I know everyone thinks that, what recruits do is all they care about is just money and that's it. And
Mm.
typically that does tend to be the case. For me personally, I think money comes secondary to putting people first. Because I feel
Mm.
like you put people first, put their careers first, the money will come, for
Mm.
example. So keep the focus on the candidates and the clients.
Mm.
The money will be a byproduct of you doing
Yeah.
right by them, for example, right? But I feel like many recruiters prioritize the money and the commission over doing right by someone, and that's
Yeah.
where things go really wrong. That's where you see, the nastiness of certain recruiters, where they'll pressurize you, push you to make
Mm.
certain decisions that you don't want to make, or sort of get you into roles. They're just lying through their teeth. And then you go in and you're like, oh my God, he told me it's all this and that. And
Mm.
I've gone in and it's the complete opposite. And they've not just done that to you, they may have done that to several folks in many situations. So I think that sort of, again, highlights, some of the bits.
Yeah, absolutely. And I feel like the authenticity is very important and that shows off in that sense. And I feel like Evan, you're very transparent in what you say, so I'm not afraid to ask you this question.
Yeah.
We're speaking about money, and
Yeah.
I feel like it will help a lot of people for them to understand how recruiters get paid. Like,
Hmm.
how are you guys getting paid? How is the customer gonna commission you? What do the percentages look like? Not giving exact amounts,
Yeah.
obviously, but I think it will give people a lot of idea of what to look for when they're having an authentic recruiter versus having maybe someone who's
Perfect.
not telling the
Well,
truth.
look, I'm an open book, so I don't sort of hide things, right? So it's pretty
Mm.
transparent now. With the recruiters, of course, you've got perm recruiters, then you've got contract recruiters. I'm mainly focusing on the perm side of things. I
Mm.
have placed people on contract. The reason, if you're wondering why I'm more perm focused, with perm side recruitment, you build relations with people, right? You add value to their lives. Contract recruitment is a bit fast, it's a bit more transactional, and it's literally just about the bottom line, right? Which I don't like
Mm.
as much. But for typical recruiters, contract recruitment is better because there's constant revenue they could be making every single month from that particular person working. Whereas with
Mm.
perm, it's a one-off fee. So the way it typically tends to work now, this is specific for the UK market now. It's different in the US market because I have done the US market. It's different in Europe because I have dipped in Germany and Nordics as well. So in the UK, standard tech recruitment agents charge a flat commission on a candidate's base salary to their clients,
Mm.
right? So this fee doesn't come out of the candidate's salary in any way. So it's a set fee, tends to be around the 15% mark. So it's, let's say, you find a top end, let's say you find a mid-level developer, right?
Mm.
And they're at the 50K mark, for example, 15% of that is 7.5 grand. That would be the fee, for example, for securing that particular candidate for your client. Essentially, for your client, it's an investment, right? So that particular amount doesn't actually come out of the candidate's base salary. So whether they went direct or whether they went via a recruiter, there'd be no difference. It's not like if I
Mm.
go direct to a particular hiring manager, I could get more money because I didn't go via a recruiter, if that's what makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now, that percentage can be a bit higher if you're a specialist recruiter, you put more effort into what you do, you're very niche, and you do what I call headhunting, right? So headhunting is niche market, very hard to find talent. Like I'll give you an example. I had a role recently where, they needed someone that had to be based outside a particular area in London. They had to be in the office 2 days a week, or was a lead dynamics developer, for example. Again, finding folks that are willing to go 2 days a week within the office in that particular destination, there wasn't that many folks in that particular domain. So it requires active headhunting, which is much more effort. So me leveraging LinkedIn, leveraging all the tools that are out there for me to, phone folks, using my network, asking for testimonials, asking for referrals. So for that sort of recruitment, the fee can be high, it can go up to 20%. Now in other regions in the world, like the US market, or let's say the German market, that percentage can even go to 25 to even as high as 30%.
Mm.
But unfortunately, that's not the norm in the UK. I mean, if I was, I'd probably be a millionaire by now.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I would be retired. But no, in the UK, typically it's 15%. I'd say dynamics, platform, niche recruiters who are on the better end of the market and who can get the value across to the customers can charge a little higher, 18%, 20%, sometimes even 25%. All of that
Mm.
depends. Again, if you work with a big general tech agency, as a client, they'll probably happily take you on at
Mm.
15%. But if you're working with a specialist, for example, myself, I only work with select number of few clients. So my fee is a bit higher than that. It's not at the 15% level, to be honest. And that's
Mm.
because I give my clients a premium service.
Yeah.
That comes from understanding the requirements, getting them the right candidate, reducing their time in interviews because they're not having to, interview 10 candidates to find the right person. I'm probably sending 1 to 2 CVs and someone's getting the job, for example.
Yeah, absolutely. No, that's amazing. And then that's very interesting. I had no idea that when you hire someone permanently for some agreements, it could be a per monthly basis. So you get paid
No,
probably for a set amount of
let me,
time. Or was I misunderstanding?
yeah, let me go back. And so the set
Yeah.
monthly amount is for contract recruiters. So the way
Ah,
that the
understood.
way that typically works is your client would give you a budget.
Okay.
Typically, so if it's budget based, so let's say it's a Dynamics Power Platform senior developer, right? The client says we've got a budget, we can only afford to pay £700 a day, for example,
Mm-hmm.
for this particular contractor. Now, again, before you get this contract role, this is what a lot of candidates don't see. In the background, as recruiters, we have to do a whole load of business development, a whole load of
Mm.
calls, a whole load of active, getting leads, chasing these clients, finding these opportunities. There's many hours that go in before you get that, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And then that goes into pricing. So then, if we're getting a role at 700 quid a day, we can't advertise it at 700 quid a day because we'd probably be at loss. There's insurance
Mm.
involved, there's financing involved. Because typically with contractors, they engage with us. We
Mm-hmm.
pay the contractor and then the client pays us. But there's usually like a 60 day, sometimes 90-day delay between the client paying us and us paying a contractor. So we have to factor that into the
Mm.
cost. So typically margins as a contract recruiter, your goal is to maximize your margins as much as possible. Now, some recruiters take this to a level where they'll be cheeky and they'll squeeze the contractor out as much as they can, for every pound basically. I think the right way to do it is get that balance right where the contractor feels like they're being paid what they're worth, and also you're retaining your margin to ensure that your business keeps operating, and also you're in profit because
Mm.
ultimately you have to be in profit, right? Or else you can't run that contract. So the typical margins tends to be at least at the bare minimum 100 quid a day. It can also go up to like 200, potentially 250. But again, it just depends on, the budget your client gives you. And also the market at that current time when it comes to contractors, how rich is the market with contractors? If there's loads of contractors and they're all competing to get contracting gigs, well, they're going to be undercutting each other, right? So you could get a contract at a slightly lower rate and you can increase your margin and vice versa. If there aren't many contractors in a very particular niche, well, then, they're in the position to ask for what they want and you have to have that conversation to come to some sort of middle ground. But ultimately, as a good contract recruiter as well, and this is something that I also like to put into practice is having a rate to ensure that the candidate is happy. If they get extensions, they keep accepting them, versus them feeling like they've been squeezed out of every couple, every single pound, and they've taken this role because they were not in the best position, and you may be taking advantage of that particular position, and then the market picks up 3, 6 months, 9 months down the line, and then they leave you and your client, and they end up going for another contract position. So it's about striking that balance. So if they typically take 500 quid a day, but let's say the market is not great and they've gone down to 450, well then don't push them and get them down to 400 just so you can increase your rate by another 50 quid a day. But if you're already making enough margin on that contract, it doesn't make sense to do that because they
Mm.
will be unhappy and they've just accepted it because they weren't in the best circumstances. But when the things and the market changes, then they'll move on because you don't have that level of trust. So I think even with contract recruits, you've got to build a relationship, for example, in contractors and do right by them, not just think about your back pocket. It's getting that balance right.
Yeah, absolutely. And contracting you mentioned is very transactional, and it's something I've been thinking about in terms of, how the market would be.
Mm-hmm.
Um, like, is it a rule of thumb for you to have as many recruiters who are contracting specialists around, or should you just have a select few? Like, how do you feel about that?
I would say with contracting, it's a little bit different. So
Mm,
with contract recruiters, I think if you want to do best by you, deal with specialists in your market, but
mm,
couple. So 3 to 4, for example, because all these different agencies would have different client bases, right? Maybe in one particular quarter, one particular half of the year, one particular agency has a particular customer that needs a whole load of contractors, for example.
mm,
And you'd be crazy not to know the best contract recruiter in that particular recruitment agency and have a relationship with them because again, with some of these positions on the contracting side of things, they're not even advertised. The role comes, 9 in the morning, and by 10 a.m., I'm calling, for example, someone that I know that's going to be available. And I know that they're the right fit because I know their area of specialty. And the
mm,
role won't even be advertised. It will literally wrap up that quick. So as a candidate, you'd be crazy not to have a couple of contract recruiters that you know really well, that know of you, that know of your expertise. So when they do get that opportunity, you're the first person they call. They're not calling someone else. Or worse, they're going out into the market looking for folks.
mm.
So
Yeah.
for you to be prioritized as a candidate, you need to build a relationship with contract recruiters because contract recruiters are pivotal to your pipeline of work. And it's funny because on the contracting side of things, candidates are a lot more open to recruiters and kind of,
Mm,
appreciate them because ultimately they do their business development. Because if they could do business development themselves, then they're willing to, pick up the phone and do all these numerous hours of essentially calls where they were looking for looking for clients and going through all these rejections. Then they wouldn't even need to recruit; they could cut them out of the picture and just go direct themselves. But because they don't have the time to do it, and also not everyone likes to do cold calls or
mm.
cold emails. It can be difficult or do sales. You're essentially offloading that to a recruiter. So a recruiter is taking that margin. Again, typically tends to be 20 to 25. They can push it to 30% in terms of that margin that they would seek for some of these positions. Now,
Yeah.
some contract roles are not like that. The client, you would have an agreement. It's a set fee, so it'd be like 15%, 20%. So it doesn't matter. For example, what rate the contractor comes in, the recruiter will always make a fixed fee. So they don't really have a vested interest to get you in any lower or any higher, to be honest, though. And they won't try to squeeze you out of every single pound. But of course, if it's a set margin, set rate they're working with, then they will try and maximize that as much as possible. But for me personally, it's about getting that balance right. Because
Mm.
if you don't get that balance right, either you're going to be at a huge loss or the candidate's going to be a huge loss. So either parties aren't going to be happy.
Yeah, interesting. These are super valuable insights, and I feel like the people at home listening is gonna find that super useful because obviously, and until you're working in the space or you have a very close friend who's a recruiter, you don't hear about those types of things. Okay, that is awesome.
I would say that's
I
that's also the
Yeah,
case. Sorry to just to
no,
bump to
please.
jump in around the relation side of things, even on the perm side of things, right?
Mm,
There's a lot of times, I'll speak to a hiring manager, I'd get a briefing of the role. They don't even have a job spec. It's going to take HR
mm,
2 weeks to create a job spec, but the market is so competitive. So we don't have 2 weeks to wait. The
yeah,
client doesn't have 2 weeks to wait. So we go out there, and ultimately, if you've got a very rich network, sometimes you don't need to even advertise the role.
mm,
You will know automatically which organizations are the right ones you need to headhunt from and where you may
mm,
already have existing connections with. So, you'll be pinging people that you've already spoken to. Hey, I got this role with this client based on our previous chats. It takes 89% of your motivations. Let's go on a quick call. Let's discuss it. And next thing you know, and over a couple of days, you've worked that job. You've got multiple options for your client, and they've hired someone. And this role hasn't even been advertised.
yeah,
And that's a big bulk of roles in the market, especially in the senior end. There's loads of senior level roles that are not being advertised by recruiters or even hiring managers directly because they just don't have the time. And they're coming to recruiters because we have those close connections and trusted relations where when we bring a role to someone, they're more receptive to it and they can make things move a lot faster. Whereas if they put it on their website, they're probably going to get 200 applicants. Probably 99% of them haven't bothered to even read the job spec. So you know, for example, they may need sponsorship, but the role can't sponsor. The role might be a
yeah,
lead developer, but they're a junior developer. The role
mm,
might be for Dynamics, but they do AWS.
mm,
You get that sort of thing. So again, they don't have the time to go through 200 applicants. And again, they could go through that route. Some organizations kind of have to. If they're really large, they've got set processes. They have to advertise it themselves before they bring it to recruiters. And more often than not, they struggle to fill it themselves directly. And even if they got the same candidate, directly versus via a recruiter, there'll be a whole different experience. For example, even the way they, that candidate might not even get the role if they went direct versus going via recruiter. Because when I get someone into a role, I'm preparing them for their interviews. I'm giving them tips, how do you interview effectively as a developer? How do you interview effectively as a functional consultant versus an architect? And how do you interview for these different stages, like first stage chats, technical screening, scenario-based questions, demos, in-person chats? All of these little things make a big difference. And if I can make someone feel confident and prepared for an interview, that's sort of half the work done there. But when they're
Yeah.
going direct, they're not getting any of that, for example. And that can make a big difference on, how well they get their experiences across and how well they do actually get in the role and getting it at the right level.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to be cheeky and I'm going to not pay for your services, but ask for your expertise. So,
Yes.
how do you approach an interview? How do you land your dream job?
Okay, awesome. So let's say you've been in a role for a couple of years and you're looking to have a move on. So ideally you'd have a recruiter that you've got a relationship with that you know
Hmm.
from the community you've engaged with. They may have placed you or they've tried to place you in the past and you start to think, it's probably the time I should move on. Have a chat with
Mm,
that person. Let them know what's going on internally in the current organization. Let them know what's the latest in terms of your skill sets, and they can then at that point educate you on the market and the roles that are out
mm,
there. Now, you may then entertain a couple of roles with them, again, and then they put you forward for a particular role for a particular company, and you're at that stage where you're like, it's been 2 years, and you're nervous. You've got to do your first stage interview. So
mm,
what do you do at this point? And part of a good recruiter is understanding what the different stages of the interview are like for that particular customer. So my job is to ask the hiring manager, what are the typical first stages like? Are you going to grow this candidate? Is it going to be a conversational based interview? Is it going to be a technical screening? And based on that
mm,
information, then I prepare you. So typically what tends to be the first stage is very much conversation, like me and you having a chat. But in that chat, you're getting a lot of information, a lot of insights
mm,
from me. So a
yeah.
hiring manager could ask, hey X, can you tell me a bit about your platform experience? And then again, a part of my job as a recruiter to prepare someone how to answer that question. And how you would answer that question is definitely not by waffling on for 20 minutes. It's answering that question really concisely and high level. So say, look, I've got 5 years of experience in the Power Platform space across Power Apps, specifically Canvas apps and model-driven apps, and I've worked within the partner space. And then you would flip the question onto the hammer and say, you know what? What is it that you would really like to know about specifically about my
Love
Power
that.
Platform experience? And then they can guide you into the areas they're really keen to know because that particular hiring manager may only really care about model-driven app experience or Canvas app experience. They'll be like, you know what, X, can you tell me a bit more about your Canvas app experience? Again, you don't have to waffle on about that. She said, well, I've developed over the last 3 years 20 Canvas apps, and of those, three were really complex within these industries.
Mm,
Um, what would you like me to really deep dive into in regards to that implementation? Would you like me to delve into the discovery phase, the build phase, the go live phase? Because if you discuss the whole end-to-end spectrum of that implementation, that could take 15, 20 minutes, right?
mm,
But that particular hiring manager may only really want to know about actually because you're coming in at a lead level, how do you actually do the discovery phase? How do you gather some of these requirements and how do you solutionize? And then you
mm,
can go into that in a bit more detail and really hone in. And then you can then ensure that the hiring manager is actually getting all the information that they would want to know. And that mitigates this common theme where, a candidate walks out of the interview thinking they've answered all the questions, but in reality, they haven't answered anything in depth enough that the hiring manager really wants to know about. And the hiring manager is walking and saying, you know what? I like the feel of this person. It seemed like a great person, but they didn't tell me enough about model-driven apps. They didn't tell me enough about how they use custom connectors because they were waffling for 20 minutes
mm,
on a very high level question. So that's
mm,
how you would approach a conversational based interview. Again, I think this is pretty. I would say this is common sense, but you do have to remind candidates that go in there, be a bit relaxed. I get it.
mm.
You will have nerves, but ultimately in an interview, both parties are interviewing each other. They need you and you need them. So
Yeah.
don't feel like you're going into an interview and it's just you needing them. You need the job.
Mm,
They also
mm,
need you, for example, right? They've got
mm,
implementation that they need to successfully do, or they've got clients who need a great consultant. So go into it feeling a bit confident and naturally you will be nervous. You might waffle here and there, but don't let that set you back. And each question is a new opportunity to get your
Mm,
experiences across. So let's say you answer one question and it comes across really poorly, or a question comes across and you've never worked on that particular area. You're like, oh
mm,
shit. They've
mm,
asked me on Power Pages and I've never done Power Pages. Well, you just be honest. Look, I've never done Power Pages,
yeah,
but this is what I've heard about Power Pages. This is what I know. If I had to do a Power Page implementation, this is how I would go about doing it. Referencing, for example, Franco's videos or referencing blogs or Microsoft Learn X, Y, and Z. But ultimately, not knowing something is totally fine.
mm, yeah,
And
absolutely.
that's how you ultimately have the first stage chats, getting your personality across.
Mm,
You know, let's say you have a particular hobby, people want to know you as well, right? And naturally, if you happen to get a hobby across, like let's say you love football and you're a Man United fan, and a hiring manager's Man United fan,
mm,
genuinely that makes a difference.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
If they like you more, then they can maybe like not be so strict on certain areas, and they can be like, you know what, we can work on those. But
yeah,
I really like this person. I can see myself getting on with him. Like, he can be a bit more coachable. But if you come across really dry and there's no personality, there's nothing about you other than just a Power Platform consultant or Power Platform developer, then it's going to be
yeah.
difficult, to be honest, for them to like you as a person, and for them not to see any of the flaws and sort of, dismiss those.
Yeah, and they won't give you the benefit of the doubt. And just a comment, God forbid if you're a Man United fan. I'm a Liverpool fan, so there's that.
Yeah,
Sorry about your season. But like,
but
I mean,
yeah,
just a yes. Sorry, Irfan, please.
no worries. In terms of that, now that's just the first stage. We can probably speak for a good 2 days about all the other stages and how you need to
Yeah,
prepare. But I think for this podcast, I think that's detailed enough about the first stage.
no,
But again,
absolutely.
when I'm speaking to candidates, they're getting all of this insights for every single interview just a couple of days before that. So it's
Yeah,
fresh in their mind and they can take it forward and then hopefully smash every single stage and then get a
yeah.
really good offer at the end of it.
No, absolutely, and that's incredible, and I feel like that's what you should be prioritizing. I'm very curious about. We've been speaking a lot about candidates, but let's speak about your customers,
Yeah.
which are ultimately businesses looking for those candidates. Like, what are you providing
Mm,
them? What do you bring to the table that perhaps other
okay.
recruiters don't?
Awesome question. So I think definitely what I bring to the table is my knowledge of Dynamics and Power Platform and
Mm,
using that to genuinely understand their requirements in detail, right? And then using those discussions to go out to market and headhunt the relevant people. I'll give you an example. Recently, I had a Power Platform consultant role, loco, no
mm,
code, a well-rounded consultant within an SMB partner. Typical consultancies that implement projects for small to medium-sized businesses, your 50 to 100K projects. Now, the SMB market and the enterprise market are two different markets.
mm,
Well, I mean, enterprise, we're talking about the 500K implementation, the ones that take 6 months to implement, or a
yeah.
year, for example. The consultants that have just worked in that particular domain are slightly different and they don't fend very well in the SMB market and vice versa. So if I know my market and I'm a specialist, I already know when I speak to a particular client where I should be headhunting from, for example, right?
Mm,
So for that particular client, they had this particular role open for 3 months, for example. They weren't getting anyone. I engaged with them on a Wednesday evening, and by Tuesday morning, I had 5 candidates
mm,
heavily qualified for their role, and two of them came from direct competitors, for example, and they were questioning me in terms of how did you get to from our direct competitors, and is there anything wrong with our competitors? That what's going on? I was like, no, there's nothing going on. It's just that I know my space, I know what you need, and I know where to focus into. So I'm not wasting time going and headhunting in organizations that I know there's going to be a big mismatch, for example. And also, they may end up taking those consultants from those organizations, but I know deep down they're not the right fit, or also they're not the best fit for my client. And that's what I give
mm,
them is that I give them the the specialty of knowing Dynamics and Power Platform, knowing the tech, knowing the domain, knowing where the different talent pools sit, having the relationships and the trust build up with candidates across the whole of the UK market and other regions, so that when I go in and speak to someone about a particular role, I've placed a friend of theirs.
mm.
I've placed someone else that they know within their business, for example, and when I message them, they're much more receptive to speaking to me and hearing me out, which therefore means, if that happens to be the right role, my clients get those candidates that are so hard to come by. The best talent, the candidates that are on the 50 K plus mark, they tend to be passive. They're not actively looking for roles. So if you've got a relationship, and I have with many folks, my clients get access to that. So my network becomes my client's network, if that makes sense.
Mm.
That's the way I
Yeah.
like to approach recruitment. It's not just about getting them hits. It's the holistic service. So if they've got issues within the organization, for example, their Glassdoor reviews aren't great. There's issues with their culture that we can work on. There's things that I've heard that are not that they're not doing in the right manner within how they treat talent. It's my job to educate them on all of these things and
Mm.
help them improve, and not just be a transactional based recruiter who takes their job spec and finds some CVs and sends them. That's not anyone can do that, right?
Mm.
But it's about being holistic. It's looking at them end to end. How many stages do they have? Is that a competitive type of process? Because if you're an SMB partner, your edge is being agile. You can have a two-stage process, wrap things up in 2 weeks, whereas a big partner, you know, as we know, like the big four, they tend to take 3 months, 2 months in a process. And during that time, you can lose candidates as well. So it's about
Mm.
educating your clients that, look, if they do have those sort of processes like the big four, it's like, well, this is how you can have an edge. This is how you can, attract candidates. This is how you can improve your benefits package to attract someone into the business, aside from just
Mm.
base salary, because base salary is not enough these days. You've got to do
Mm.
so much more than the salary to get someone within the organization. It's the culture, it's the package, it's, what do you do in the community? Again, if you're not out there in the community, then people question, especially if you're coming in and you're quite involved in the community, do these folks really care about the Maxwell space? Are they
Mm.
investing in the community? Are they helping upskill others? Are they sponsoring these events? And if they're not, it's my job to educate them to do these, connect them with the organizations where they can sponsor. And again, they don't have to pay, an arm and a leg to sponsor an event, or be part of the community, right?
Mm.
So I think that's what they get with me, is that whole holistic service. But again, it's very boutique, and it's not transactional. Essentially, what I call a white glove service. That's what they get with
Mm.
me.
Yeah, absolutely. And I feel like you mentioned a lot in terms of some of the challenges that those customers face and how you can help them.
Yeah.
I'm curious myself about those challenges. Like,
Mm.
what are businesses not doing enough of within the Power Platform space?
So, in terms of specifically from talent attraction or talent retention, or from every aspect.
Let's go with attraction because that's the first step, and then we
Okay.
can get on to retention after that.
I think attraction. I think there's multiple elements, right? So, first of all, it's probably not going about the hiring process in the right way, right?
Mm.
Like again, you have clients out there, they have had a role for 2 months, and they're still hesitant to work with a recruiter, especially a specialist recruiter that's well known
Mm.
in the community, right? That can deliver to what they need. Like if you're a Microsoft partner and you don't have one in your team for a month, I mean, we all know what consultants typically charge consultants out. You're looking at 800 quid a day, £1,000 a day. Some consultancies are charging 2 grand a day. You don't have someone at that level
Crazy.
for a month, 2 months, 3 months. Just think about the amount of revenue and profits they're missing out on. And
Oh yeah.
ultimately, within the consultancy domain, talent is so important in that sense. And if they're just going on and they're just posting it on their website, well, no one knows of them. They're not engaged in the community. No one's going to see that job post, and they're not going to apply. Now, if they're a well-known company and they do post a job post, they get loads of applicants. So again, they don't have anyone dedicated in the team to actually go through those profiles. The third thing they could be doing is, incentivizing their current team to, refer folks and offer referral bonuses. Again, if their team is small or they're not that active in the community, and also their day job isn't recruitment, so there's only so many folks they're going to know. Again,
Mm.
these are all the bottlenecks to have when it comes to attracting talent. Whereas
Yeah.
when you engage with a specialist recruiter, you get access to their network and all the folks that they know, and it allows you to kind of offload some of that recruitment headhunting to them, because as a hiring manager, you don't have time to be messaging, 100, 200, 300 people and continuously build your network
Mm.
so that when the right person comes along for the right role, you can message them. That's what a recruiter does. And you offload that to a recruiter and you see that as an investment. And a good recruiter will pay that investment back many times over, right? So our 15, 20%, 25%, 30% fee, whatever it may be, may seem a lot, and when you're paying for it, but you're getting so much value out of it. You'd be crazy not to work with a specialist. Now again, some of the reservations that I have heard from many clients is, we work with agencies and you know they don't understand the requirements. They try to push candidates that are not right for the role, for example.
Mm.
or they get a candidate in, we give them an offer, but they go elsewhere, for example, or they join us and they leave within a month. And I think some of that is down to working with poor recruiters, for example, and also some of that could be down to issues within that organization itself. Because ultimately, my job is to understand your requirements, have conversations with folks, convince them to speak to my clients, get them through that process, prepare them, do all that end to end, convince them to take the job with my client because it's likely they'll be working with other clients at the same time, and ultimately helping them be secured for your particular organization, right? Mitigating counter offers is a thing that happens in the market all the time.
Mm,
A very nasty process sometimes. And it's managing all of that, 3 month notice, and helping you essentially have them join day one. Now, if 2 months into the job, 3 months into the job, that person wants to leave because you've changed your way of working, or you've changed your, I don't know, behavior as a business, well, then that's on you. But what typically happens in the recruitment market when that tends to happen, someone leaves within 1 month, 2 months, or 3 months, there's a set fee that you'd have to give back to your client. I think some of that's come from, recruiters devaluing their service, to be honest,
mm,
because the bulk of our job that we do, all of that, it's essentially, it doesn't cost the client anything, but it costs us a lot. And until someone joins, only then we get paid, right? So all of that, I could do all that work, have someone join day one, and a client could be like, they've left a month in, you have to give us all our money back. Um, which, but even if it's on them, it's like, well, what can I do in that
yeah,
situation? But again, it's very much it's become a bit of a norm in the UK, but I think it's taking accountability away from some of the clients, to be honest. And this is what I try to educate my clients is, you need to have an effective recruitment process, ask the right questions, vet someone. If you're having loads of people leave 8 weeks into your company, there's probably an issue within the company. Either
right,
you're not screening candidates properly, either you're getting the wrong message across about what your company's like. If you might be getting across like your company is very laid back and it's not work hard, play hard. But when the reality is it's the total opposite. And you may still get candidates who appeal to that sort of culture, but you're not getting that right message across, and you're getting candidates in who want to come into a role and want great work-life balance, don't want to be in a setting where it's work hard, play hard, and they come to that and they're like, oh shit, I've made the wrong decision here, and then they leave 2 months in.
yeah,
And you haven't even communicated that to the recruiter sometimes, so sometimes we can only go off what our clients say, right?
yeah,
But again, as a good recruiter, you try to, push through that, ask them what's it like, ask others in the market, because as a good recruiter, as a specialist, you will know of folks that have worked within that business that have left.
mm,
You can question them, what was it like working there? Why did you leave X, Y, Z? And if you're hearing, one thing and the hiring manager is telling you something completely different, then, you can question the hiring manager, is this really the case?
yeah,
Because ultimately, at least for me, you know, the candidate is the epicenter of everything. If I do right by the candidate, I'm doing right by my client, right? And then
yeah,
I'm doing right by myself as a recruiter. So it's getting that balance right. Even though the client pays me the fee, it's the candidate that you need to prioritize. And if you prioritize the candidate, then you're therefore prioritizing the client because you're getting the right person in for the right role.
mm,
And then therefore the client can get someone that's going to stay and hopefully reap the rewards of that for many years.
yeah, absolutely. And that's a huge step, right? I mean, what I really like about the way you approach this mindset is it's the case of it all comes with trying to do good by everyone involved, right? And it all starts with the person who you're actually landing the role, because ultimately that person has a family, has responsibilities, etc. The customer has a budget. You're gonna have to make those two things align, which is
Hmm.
why I respect a lot the work that you do. I mean, how do you get any time to yourself? Because for me, I mean, I work with technology every day.
Yep.
Like I'm busy trying to tell a machine what to do, not
Hmm.
so much telling people. Respectfully,
Yeah.
I guess in recruitment it's the opposite. I mean, unless you're looking at LinkedIn Sales Navigator, it's probably more or less just trying to get people to, convince people, or not even convince them, but try and understand them and listen to them and build that network. um we're coming towards the end of the hour, but how do you manage that in terms of the amount of people and the amount of times you have to communicate on a daily basis? Like, do you not get burnt out?
You can. I mean, recruiters are not known for having the best work-life balance. And to be honest,
Right.
if you want a work-life balance, do not go into recruitment. Like, don't get me wrong. Like when I was a consultant, thinking I went into recruitment, it would be a walk in the park. You know, all these
Right.
guys do is take CVs and find candidates, and they're making loads of money. It's so much more difficult than it looks. And each
Yeah.
person is a client, and they come with a whole load of emotions, and they can be sometimes very unpredictable. Like I
Yeah.
said, you could do all this work. You know, it could take me 2 months to get a client, convince them to work with me, you know, speak to them 8 to 10 times. Typically, it's 8 to 10 touch points before a client would want to engage with you.
Wow.
And then, you know, get them the candidate. That can take like another month, get them through the process. And then, you know, at the end of the day, you know, either they don't take the job, they take another job, or they take a counter offer, or they join and they leave a month in, and all your work's gone in the bin, basically, right? More or less, you're not getting paid, and that can be a good 3 4 months sometimes
Yeah.
to wait for your first invoice to land, and that can be quite difficult, especially when you're running your own business, right?
Yeah.
Because you don't have I don't have a salary, right? So I
Yeah.
have all these running costs, and these invoices take many months to come in, and many things can essentially hamper that, and that's where things can significantly go wrong.
Mm.
But yeah, look, I enjoy speaking to people, right? So I'm building those connections, but naturally for me, it's knowing when to wind down. So, you know, again, because it's a new business, there's no such thing as, you know, only working a 40-hour work week. There can be 60-hour work weeks, 70-hour work weeks. You have to do it because you need to survive. You know, this is a business, your business is your life, basically.
Mm.
But if it's something that you enjoy, then yes, it can, some people say, you know, something you really love and enjoy, it doesn't feel like work. It can still feel like work even if you love it.
Yeah, of course,
But
of course.
the reality is, you know, it's something that you enjoy and you see a long-term future in it. So you keep doing it and you keep building those relationships.
Mm.
And ultimately, the more conversation I have, the more relationships I build, the better network I have. And like I think Sarah mentioned this in the past, some of these folks that you're placing as candidates will become hiring managers one day. Or, for example, they go to a new organization and they happen to need a new senior developer in their team and they don't work with a recruitment agency and they know of you, you've worked with them, maybe they didn't take your client's job, they take the other client's job, but you are really amicable about it. They went
Mm.
somewhere else and then they come back to you and they say thank you by, you know, introducing you to the hiring manager in that particular organization. So ultimately, you know, there's multiple ways from, you know, doing good by someone and then them paying you back. I mean, I think back in November when I sorry, back in sort of October, November time when I set up the business, didn't have clients, so you just speak to candidates. You know, you be honest, I don't have roles, but this is how I can create roles for you. Have those
Mm.
conversations and you know, give value, educate them about the market, what they can do about getting roles. And I did this for one particular person and spoke to them for about an hour, gave them a lowdown of the whole market, all the relevant hiring managers they could contact. I know most recruiters would not do that in a million years. Give hiring manager deals because they could circumvent them and go direct. But at that time, I was like, look, I'm not gonna spend 2 months trying to get this particular client. So you don't have a job for 2 months because they were just made redundant, right? I was like, I need to do right by you. I'll take care of you. Here's the landscape of the market. Here are the hiring managers. Here's how you go direct. Here's how you get role. Helped them throughout the processes and ended up getting a role as a consulting director in a particular Microsoft partner. And you know, a couple of days ago, reached out to me, said, look, you know, we're going to be looking to recruit. I really like the way you did recruitment. You took care of me, so I want to work with you. I know you know your stuff, and you know you're going to do right by candidates, and therefore you're going to do right by us. So I want to
Mm.
engage with you, and that came back full circle. And this was over, you know, now it's been like 5 months. So yeah, like I
Yeah.
said, you put people first. You know, it will come back. And I think that's really important for me. Don't be a transactional, money hungry recruiter because
Mm.
that'll bite you in the backside. And I think while a lot of people get these experiences, candidates, just a bit of insight, most of the recruits that you see in the market typically come in as graduates into a new job. You know, they've had managers overseeing them. It's heavily pressurized environments. If they're not getting targets, they're going to get fired, right? So they're taking every shortcut under the book to get a deal in, or they're going to lose their job, right? So it's a very pressurized environment. It doesn't excuse some of the behavior that they do, but it's a result of those sort of toxic work environments that then affects the way they behave and then the way they see candidates as essentially just cash cows, essentially, and that's it.
Yeah.
And that's where the negative image of recruiters sort of comes across.
Yeah, it makes sense. And definitely before I started, I had a bit of a slimy reaction to recruiters. Like I remember looking on LinkedIn and just ignoring the contract jobs or anything that recruiters were putting out there. If I saw like, a specific brand, I'm not going to mention any names, but
Yeah.
Power Platform professional or developer or consultant, architect, I wouldn't apply because I was like, what the hell does this mean?
Mm.
But this has definitely answered a lot of the questions for me. Um, Afan, we've gone past the hour. I always like to ask this question, and then we'll get into where the people can find you. But
Hmm.
it's around happiness. It's a weird topic. You don't have to
Mm.
answer. But personally, I think ultimately what we do is for the pursuit of freedom and happiness. So I always like to ask this question, even though I feel like I've asking this question a few times. Um, Everyone seems to have a different answer,
Hmm.
but I feel like in some ways the pursuit of happiness can be futile, but I think it's always a nice thought.
Hmm.
So, what does happiness mean to you?
I think happiness for me is feeling content
Mm,
with what you have right now and being grateful for that.
mm,
Um, I think that for me that comes from, my faith, for example, and knowing that we're blessed in so many ways. There's so many people out there that don't have the blessings that we have. So being happy in your current state, I think also appreciating the fact that you can always have more in life, but doesn't always give you more happiness sometimes. I think for me also it's feeling happy that I've got like a goal and a mission. Like for me, doing what I'm doing right now isn't just about me, it's about the wider stuff for me. For I'm doing it for my mom, I'm doing it for my dad, I'm doing it for my wider family. It's I come from a particular background. My parents came into this particular country as a refugee, right? So I come from a disadvantaged background, so I want to change that. So my happiness will be one day is ensuring that the future generation are doing better than I did, to have better opportunities
mm,
than I had, you know what I mean? And ensuring that my parents are going to be taken care of, in their elderly age, that's going to give me true happiness. And
mm,
knowing also that the work that I do actually has a meaningful effect, meaningful change to some people's lives. I mean, recently I placed a candidate, and his pay difference was about 15 to 20 grand, net. That has a big effect on someone's life.
oh yeah, yeah,
So knowing, I can have these tangible changes in people's lives, and it makes them happier, makes me happier, right? And on the side, I get paid to do it as well. So it's like a
yeah.
win-win situation.
Yeah, absolutely. No, thank you for answering that. And I resonate with you when you say parents coming in as immigrants, as refugees. I'm sure they haven't had the best life, at least speaking with for my ones,
Exactly.
and then trying to help them in the best way we can. I think that's definitely brought me a lot of joy. Um, Irfan, thank you for such a transparent, open conversation. I'd love to roll out the red carpet for these last few minutes. Where can the people find you? Customers, clients? The floor is yours, my friend.
So if you want to connect with me, please find me on LinkedIn. So Erfan Siddiq. You can find me on my website as well, Link Experts. That's the name of the recruitment agency. Any questions that you have around anything around exploring the market, if you're struggling to find talent, just get in touch via my LinkedIn. I'll hear you out. We'll have a conversation, and I'll try to help you um, as much as I possibly can. So,
Amazing.
yeah.
Thank you
Thank
very
you so
much for
much.
that,
Thank
Irfan.
you for having
No,
me.
my pleasure, man. It's been an amazing conversation. And thank you so much to the people at home listening to this. You can check out Irfan's work on his LinkedIn. All of the links will be in the description. He does incredible work. He was actually the first one who had this conversation with me before I started doing a lot of this content stuff. So, yeah, Irfan, thank you very much for that. Forever grateful. Check him out in the description. And thank you so much for tuning in. Take it easy.
Thank you so much. Take care.